Three officers noticed a little girl walking alone after school, her backpack worn, her steps hesitant. They followed her through bright neighborhoods, past dark alleys, until they uncovered a heartbreaking reality hidden behind a rusted door. A starving child, a mother on the brink, a family abandoned by the world. But in that moment, they made a choice that would change everything. This is a story of compassion, of second chances, and of hope. Welcome to TH Voices of the Underdog, where untold stories find their voice. Don't forget to leave a comment sharing your thoughts and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with our latest videos, because the truth deserves to be told. It was an unusually quiet afternoon in Willow Creek, a small town where crime was rare, and life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The kind of place where neighbors waved at each other from across their white picket fences, and the local diner knew everyone's favorite breakfast order by heart. But on this particular afternoon, inside the dimly lit Willow Creek police station, Lieutenant Ethan Cole sat at his desk, scrolling through his phone absent-mindedly during a rare moment of downtime. Then, something made him stop. A video, shaky and grainy, had been shared hundreds of times across social media. The caption was simple but alarming. "Someone, please help this girl." Ethan tapped on the video, and what he saw sent a chill down his spine. A small, frail girl, no older than 8, stood in front of Willow Creek Elementary School, gripping a cardboard sign with uneven, bold letters scrawled in black marker. "Please help my family." Her tiny hands trembled as she held the sign up, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mom is starving. She's going to die." Ethan could hear the uncertainty in her voice, the way her eyes darted nervously, as if she wasn't sure she should even be standing there. The video lasted only 30 seconds, but by the time it ended, Ethan felt a heavy knot form in his chest. Without a second thought, he forwarded the video to Sergeant Olivia Martinez and Officer Jack Turner, his most trusted colleagues. He didn't bother with explanations. He simply attached a message: "We need to find this girl." Ethan didn't wait for a response. He grabbed his jacket, adjusted his badge, and strode out of his office with purpose. By the time he reached the parking lot, Olivia and Jack were already waiting by their unmarked patrol car, their faces mirroring his concern. "Did you see the video?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with urgency. Olivia nodded, her dark eyes filled with worry. "She looks so young, too young to be standing out there alone like that." Jack exhaled sharply. "And the way she said it, like she's already lost hope. We need to act fast." Without another word, the three officers climbed into the car. Olivia quickly pulled up a map on her phone, marking Willow Creek Elementary School, only a few blocks away. They arrived just as the final school bell rang, signaling the end of the day. A flood of children poured out of the front entrance, laughing, running, their colorful backpacks bouncing as they rushed toward waiting parents or school buses. But she wasn't among them. Ethan scanned the crowd, his heartbeat quickening. Had she already left? Had someone taken her? Then he saw her. A small figure stood alone near the edge of the sidewalk, clutching her worn-out backpack tightly to her chest. Her oversized coat draped over her tiny frame like a blanket, and her eyes darted cautiously as if she was expecting someone to chase her. "That's her," Ethan murmured. Jack nodded, keeping his voice low. "We can't spook her. If she thinks we're a threat, she might run." Olivia adjusted her coat. "Let's follow, see where she goes first." And so they did. She walked with small, quick steps, glancing over her shoulder every few minutes. It was clear she was used to being afraid. The officers followed from a safe distance, staying on the opposite side of the street. She passed by Main Street Grocery, not sparing a glance at the vibrant fruit stands out front. She didn't stop at Benny's Diner, where the scent of fresh baked bread filled the air. There was no curiosity in her movements, no hesitation, only a quiet urgency. Then Ethan noticed something. She wasn't going home. The further she walked, the worse the surroundings became. The neat, well-kept houses gave way to cracked sidewalks, rusted fences, and boarded-up windows. The graffiti-covered walls stood in stark contrast to the picturesque town center. Jack muttered under his breath, "She's heading toward the abandoned district." Ethan's jaw tightened. That part of town had been all but forgotten. Most of the buildings had been condemned. No child should be living there. Then she disappeared, vanishing into a dark alleyway. The officers quickened their pace, keeping their footsteps light. As they reached the mouth of the alley, they saw her approach a run-down apartment complex, its once white walls now covered in dirt and grime. She hesitated at the entrance, looking over her shoulder one last time before slipping inside. Ethan's grip tightened on his radio. "This is it." The stairwell groaned under the weight of years of neglect. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay. The officers followed her carefully, watching as she climbed the rusted stairs to the second floor. She stopped in front of apartment 2B, fumbling with a set of old, rusted keys. It took her 3 tries to turn the lock, the door finally creaking open. Without looking back, she stepped inside. Ethan exhaled slowly. "This is where she lives." Olivia hesitated. "We don't know what we're walking into." "Could be dangerous." Jack stepped forward. "And we also don't know how much longer she can survive in there." Ethan nodded, making a decision. He approached the door and knocked. Silence. Then hurried footsteps. The door cracked open just an inch and 2 wide, frightened eyes peered through. "I didn't steal anything, I swear," she blurted out before they could even speak. "Please don't take me away." Her voice shook, her tiny body trembling. She gripped her backpack like a lifeline, her thin fingers clutching the fabric so tightly her knuckles turned white. Ethan knelt to her level, keeping his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Hey, it's okay," he said gently. "We're not here to take you away, we just want to make sure you're all right." The girl hesitated, her breathing uneven. Then, slowly, she stepped back and pushed the door open wider. "You can see for yourself," she whispered. What they saw inside would haunt them forever. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over Willow Creek as children poured out of Willow Creek Elementary, their laughter filling the air. Parents stood by the gates, calling their names while groups of friends ran toward the school buses. It was the usual end-of-day scene, except for one small girl who walked alone. She moved differently from the other students, silent, cautious, deliberate. While the others chattered excitedly about their plans, she remained quiet, gripping the straps of her worn-out backpack as if it was the only thing keeping her anchored. The coat she wore was several sizes too big, its edges frayed from wear. From across the street, Lieutenant Ethan Cole, Sergeant Olivia Martinez, and Officer Jack Turner followed at a distance. Their eyes never left the girl. "She's in a hurry," Jack noted, his tone low. Olivia frowned. "And she's looking over her shoulder. She knows how to be careful." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest as he watched her small frame disappear further down the road. No child should have to walk home with that much fear in their eyes. The girl didn't take the usual route through the quiet, suburban streets lined with white picket fences. Instead, she veered in the opposite direction, toward a part of town that had long been forgotten. The streets changed before their eyes. The neatly trimmed lawns and colorful gardens gave way to cracked sidewalks, abandoned buildings, and boarded-up storefronts. The deeper they followed her, the more it became clear. She was heading into a place where people didn't go unless they had to. Graffiti covered the walls, and the air smelled of mildew, gasoline, and stale alcohol. Stray cats slinked through the alleys, darting between overflowing dumpsters. A distant argument echoed from inside a rundown convenience store. "This place has been falling apart for years," Olivia murmured, her eyes scanning the deteriorating surroundings. "It's worse than I remember." Jack exhaled sharply. "No kid should be walking around here alone." Ethan's focus remained locked on the girl as she pressed forward, her movements precise, practiced, and eerily calm. She's done this before, he thought. That realization sent a chill down his spine. Finally, the girl stopped in front of an old, crumbling apartment complex. The paint had long since peeled away, revealing rotting wood and rusted metal. A faded sign above the entrance read "Evergreen Housing," though nothing about it looked welcoming. She hesitated, looking around one last time, then pulled a rusted key from her pocket. Her small hand struggled to turn it in the lock, but after a few tries, the door creaked open. Without looking back, she slipped inside, letting the darkness swallow her whole. Ethan exhaled. "This is it." Olivia tensed beside him. "What now?" Jack adjusted his belt. "We knock." Ethan nodded, stepping up to the door. He rapped firmly on the wood. A long silence followed. Then soft footsteps from inside. The door cracked open just slightly, and two wide, terrified eyes peeked through the gap. "I didn't steal anything, I swear," she blurted out before they could even speak. "Please don't take me away." Her voice shook, and her small body trembled. She clutched her backpack like a shield, as if expecting them to grab it from her. Ethan immediately lowered himself to her level, keeping his voice gentle, steady. Hey, it's okay," he said softly. "We're not here to take you away, we just want to make sure you're safe." The girl's chest rose and fell rapidly. She looked at each of them, scanning their faces as if trying to decide if they were friend or foe. After a long pause, she slowly stepped back, pushing the door open wider. "You can see for yourself," she whispered. The officers stepped into the apartment, and the stench of mildew and decay hit them immediately. The air inside was heavy, stagnant, and cold. The walls were cracked and water-stained, the ceiling sagging slightly in the corners. The floor was warped, the wood beneath their boots soft from years of leaks and neglect. There was almost no furniture, just a single, stained mattress in the corner, a rickety wooden table, and a pile of blankets too thin to provide warmth. A dim, flickering lamp cast trembling shadows against the walls. Olivia pressed a hand to her mouth. How is she even living here? Then movement. In the farthest corner, a frail figure lay motionless on the mattress. A woman, so thin she looked barely alive. Her skin was pale, her lips cracked, her hair tangled and unwashed. Her chest rose and fell shallowly, her breathing barely audible. The girl took a small step forward, placing herself between the officers and the woman as if protecting her. "That's my mom," she said softly. "She's not dead, she's just tired." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He had seen poverty before, had witnessed struggle and desperation. But this was a child standing between her dying mother and the only people who could help. Jack reached for his radio. "We need an ambulance, now." The girl's eyes widened in panic. "Please don't take her away," she pleaded. "I can take care of her, I'll find more food, I just need more time." Her voice broke on the last word, tears welling up in her eyes. Olivia knelt beside the woman, gently touching her wrist to check for a pulse. The mother stirred weakly, her hollow eyes fluttering open for just a second. "Please," she murmured. "She's all I have." Ethan looked at Olivia, then at Jack. They all knew what this meant. This wasn't just a routine welfare check. This was a fight for survival. And whether they realized it yet or not, their lives had just become entangled in this little girl's world forever. The apartment felt colder than it should have. The officers stepped further inside, their boots pressing against the warped wooden floor, the air thick with the scent of mildew and something else. Something stale, lifeless. The dim light from the flickering lamp barely reached the corners of the room, leaving long, stretching shadows that seemed to move on their own. Ethan exhaled sharply, his breath visible in the frigid air. There was almost nothing in the apartment. No couch, no chairs, no decorations, no sign of comfort. Only a single stained mattress sat on the floor, covered with a thin blanket that barely looked warm enough for a cold night. And on that mattress lay a woman who barely looked alive. She was frail, her frame almost skeletal, her skin pale and clammy. Her dark hair was tangled against the pillow, her lips cracked and dry. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths, so faint that for a moment Olivia thought she might not be breathing at all. Then a small voice broke the silence. "She's not dead. She's just very tired." The girl's whisper was so quiet it was almost drowned out by the distant sound of a siren somewhere outside. Olivia dropped to her knees, reaching for the woman's wrist, fingers pressing gently against her pulse point. Come on," she thought, trying to feel for any sign of life. Then, a faint, sluggish beat. She let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "She's alive, but barely," Olivia murmured. The girl inched closer, her arms still wrapped protectively around her tattered backpack. Her wide, fearful eyes darted between Olivia and her mother's motionless body. Ethan watched the scene unfold, the lump in his throat growing heavier. He had seen desperation before, but this was something else entirely. This was survival at its breaking point. The mother stirred, a weak, almost non-existent movement. Her eyelids fluttered, but it took her a long moment to find the strength to fully open them. Her gaze was unfocused, but when she saw Olivia hovering above her, something like panic flashed across her face. Her voice was barely more than a breath when she whispered, "Please, don't take my daughter away." Her hand trembled as she reached out, not for herself, not for help, but for the little girl standing beside her. The girl immediately dropped to her knees, clutching her mother's hand with both of her own, as if holding on tightly would keep her from slipping away completely. "I'm right here, Mommy," the girl choked out, her voice breaking. Ethan clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm, but his heart was pounding against his ribs. How long had this woman been lying here like this? How long had this little girl been alone, waiting, hoping her mother would wake up? Jack stepped away, glancing toward the small, barely functioning kitchen. The entire apartment was freezing, the only warmth coming from the weak yellow glow of a single old lamp. The fridge door was slightly ajar. Jack pulled it open and his stomach dropped. Inside sat a single, nearly empty water bottle, nothing else. No food, no milk. Not even a half-eaten meal. He swallowed hard and moved to the counter. A pile of unopened envelopes lay there, some ripped open, others crumpled into a heap. He reached for one and his chest tightened when he saw the words, "Final notice past due balance." The bills were stacked high, all overdue, all ignored, likely because there was no money left to pay them. Jack turned back toward the others, his voice grim. "They have nothing." Ethan already knew it, but hearing Jack say it out loud made it worse. The girl's breathing hitched, and when he turned back to look at her, tears were slipping down her cheeks. She wiped at them angrily, as if ashamed to be crying in front of them. "Dad left," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan froze. The little girl sniffled, her hand still gripping her mother's. "Mom had no money after that. We haven't eaten for 2 days." The words hit like a hammer to the chest. Ethan had been a cop for a long time. He had seen drug busts, domestic abuse, gang violence, and poverty in its cruelest form. But this, a child, no older than 8, standing in a freezing apartment, watching her mother waste away while she went hungry, this was something different. This was the kind of suffering that broke people. For a long moment, no one spoke. Olivia wiped at her own eyes and placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Hey, you don't have to do this alone anymore, okay?" The girl stared at her, blinking hard as if she wasn't sure she could believe that. Jack pulled out his radio, his voice sharp. "Dispatch, we need EMS at our location ASAP. Woman is unresponsive but breathing, signs of severe malnutrition. Child is also at risk. Copy. Copy that, officers. EMS en route." The radio crackled, but the girl barely reacted. She just sat there, holding her mother's hand, her small body trembling. "Please don't take her away," she whispered again. "She just needs to get better, that's all. I can help her, I promise." Ethan crouched beside her, his voice firm but kind. "She needs a doctor, sweetheart, but we're not going to take her away from you, I promise." The girl's lower lip trembled, but she nodded slowly as if making herself believe his words. A siren wailed in the distance, growing closer. Olivia gently touched the mother's forehead. "Hold on," she murmured softly. "Help is coming." The girl turned toward Ethan. "Will they take me away?" Ethan felt something deep inside him crack. He looked her straight in the eyes. "No, we're going to help both of you." The girl stared at him for a long moment, then, finally, nodded. And for the first time since they had arrived, she let go of the tension in her shoulders, leaning just slightly into Olivia's touch. Outside, the flashing lights of an ambulance lit up the darkened apartment. This was only the beginning. The tension in the room was suffocating. A child shouldn't have to go through this. Ethan watched the little girl as she clung desperately to her mother's hand, her knuckles white from gripping so tightly. The woman's chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths, her body so frail she barely looked alive. Time was running out. "We need medical assistance now," Olivia said, pressing her radio to her mouth. Her voice remained calm, but there was urgency in her tone. "Dispatch, this is Sergeant Martinez. We have a critical patient, unconscious but breathing. Severe signs of malnutrition and dehydration. Immediate medical attention required. There is also a minor present. Child appears malnourished. We need EMS, priority 1. The radio crackled in response. "Copy that. EMS en route. Ida, 5 minutes." Ethan exhaled in relief. 5 minutes felt like an eternity, but at least help was on the way. Jack, still crouched near the fridge, opened it fully and let out a curse under his breath. Ethan turned to see what had caused his reaction and felt his own stomach tighten. There was nothing inside. Nothing but a single, nearly empty bottle of water, condensation forming around its edges. No food, no milk, no leftovers in containers. Nothing. Jack closed the fridge softly, as if doing it too hard might break the last fragile piece of this home. He turned to the little girl, his voice careful. "When was the last time you ate?" The girl hesitated. Her small fingers tightened around her mother's wrist. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to answer, but she hesitated. Then, in a quiet whisper, she admitted, 2 days ago." Silence. Ethan felt his jaw lock. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath to keep her composure. Jack clenched his fists. 2 days. 2 days without food. 2 days of hunger gnawing at her insides. 2 days of waiting for her mother to wake up. It was unforgivable. Jack didn't waste another second. "I'll be right back." Without waiting for a response, he pushed open the apartment door and sprinted toward the patrol car outside. The girl's eyes followed him, uncertainty flashing across her face. "Where's he going?" she asked quietly. Ethan gave her a reassuring smile. "To get you something to eat." The girl blinked, confused. The idea that someone would bring her food just because seemed completely foreign to her. A moment later, Jack burst back into the apartment, carrying a bottle of water, a protein bar, and a small pack of crackers. It wasn't much, but it was something. A lifeline. He knelt down, holding out the protein bar first. "Here, sweetheart, eat." The girl stared at the bar as if she wasn't sure it was real. Her thin hands trembled as she took it. The moment she tore open the wrapper, her restraint vanished. She devoured it, taking huge, frantic bites, barely chewing before swallowing. The bar was gone in seconds. She didn't even stop to breathe. Ethan and Jack exchanged a look, neither of them speaking. She had been starving. Jack quickly unscrewed the cap of the water bottle and held it out. The girl grabbed it, taking desperate gulps, some of it spilling down her chin, but she didn't stop. She drank as though she had never expected to have water again. Ethan felt a deep, unfamiliar ache in his chest. He had seen cases like this before: neglect, starvation, desperation. But something about this tiny, determined girl fighting so hard to keep herself and her mother alive hit him harder than he was prepared for. No child should have to live like this. Olivia rubbed the girl's back gently, voice soothing. "Slow down, sweetheart. It's okay. There's more if you need it." The girl froze, staring at her, as if she couldn't believe that. More, there's more. Her small shoulders shook, and suddenly silent tears rolled down her cheeks. She wiped at them quickly, as though she didn't want anyone to see. Ethan exhaled softly. "You're not alone anymore." His voice was gentle. "We're going to help your mom. And we're going to help you too." The girl stared at him, as if deciding whether or not to believe him. Then, quietly, she nodded. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. The girl's small body tensed. As the flashing red and blue lights filled the room, she clung to her mother's arm. The door burst open, and two paramedics rushed in. "Vitals are weak," one of them muttered, quickly assessing the woman. "BP dangerously low. We need to transport immediately." The moment they reached for her mother, the girl screamed. "No, don't take her." She threw herself over her mother, wrapping her arms around her like a shield. "Please don't take her. I'll be good. I'll do anything, just don't take her away from me." Her sobs shattered the silence. Ethan immediately stepped in, his voice soft but firm. Hey, look at me." She didn't move. He gently touched her shoulder. "We're not separating you, I promise." She froze, breathing unevenly. Slowly, she lifted her tear-streaked face, looking into his eyes. Ethan held her gaze. "I swear to you, no one is taking you away from her." She sniffled, staring at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. But she never let go of her mother's hand. The paramedics worked quickly, lifting the mother onto the stretcher, setting up in Roman 4 drip. The girl watched every movement, her fingers twitching like she was waiting for someone to pull her away at any second. Then Olivia smiled at her. "Do you want to ride with her?" The girl's head snapped up. "I can." "Of course," Olivia reassured her. "You should be with her." The girl scrambled to climb into the ambulance, gripping her mother's hand tightly. As the doors slammed shut, Ethan, Olivia, and Jack stood watching in silence. Jack exhaled, rubbing his face. "This isn't just another case." Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "No, it's not. Because this wasn't just about an emergency response. This was about saving a little girl who had spent far too long fighting to survive on her own. And now they had to do more than just help. They had to change her life." The sun rose over Willow Creek, its golden light spilling across the quiet streets. But for the 3 officers standing in the police precinct, there was no time to appreciate the morning stillness. They had work to do. It had been 3 days since they had found the girl and her mother in that dark, freezing apartment. 3 days since paramedics had rushed the woman to the hospital, since the girl had clung to her mother's side in the ambulance, since Ethan had made her a promise. "We won't let anything happen to her." Now, it was time to make good on that promise. Ethan, Olivia, and Jack worked tirelessly. First, they reached out to local shelters, but the thought of the girl and her mother living in a temporary shelter felt wrong. They needed a home, not just a place to sleep. Next, they contacted food banks. Within hours, volunteers arranged boxes of canned goods, fresh produce, and meals ready to be delivered to their apartment. Then, Olivia had an idea. "We should start a fundraiser." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You think people will donate?" "I think they will if they hear the story." Olivia's voice was certain. "A mother who fought to stay alive for her daughter. A little girl who starved herself to keep her mother safe. People care, Jack." So they did it. They started a fundraiser titled, "Help a Single Mother and Her Brave Daughter." They shared the story, without names or identifying details. Just a simple, heartfelt message. A little girl in our town went 2 days without food so she could care for her sick mother. She had no one else. But today she has us. Let's make sure she never has to struggle alone again. Within hours, donations started flooding in. $10, $50, $100. By the end of the first night, the fundraiser had raised over $5,000, enough to cover medical bills and 2 months' rent. By the end of the week, it had tripled. Ethan, who had seen his fair share of cruelty in the world, found himself staring at the growing number, shaking his head in disbelief. People still cared. The hospital discharged the mother 1 week later. She had expected to return to the same cold, empty apartment where she would have to struggle just to stay afloat. Instead, she found something entirely different. The officers had used some of the donation money to completely transform the place. The old mattress had been replaced with a real bed, warm blankets neatly tucked around the frame. The fridge, once empty and lifeless, was now fully stocked: milk, bread, fruit, and enough food to last weeks. In the living room, a small couch and a coffee table had been added, making the apartment feel like a home for the first time in years. The mother stood frozen in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, her frail body trembling. Tears slipped down her face as she turned to look at them. I don't know how to thank you." Ethan shook his head. "You don't have to." The little girl ran past her mother and straight into Olivia's arms, sobbing with happiness. "I didn't think we'd ever have food again," she whispered. "I thought we'd always be hungry." Olivia squeezed her tighter, her own voice thick with emotion. "You'll never go hungry again, sweetheart, I promise." Jack cleared his throat and turned away, blinking rapidly. Ethan wasn't sure if he was about to cry or if he just didn't want anyone to see it. But it didn't matter, because today there was only joy. A week passed. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Ethan, Olivia, and Jack returned to the apartment. The door flew open before they could even knock. The little girl sprinted toward them, her face lighting up the moment she saw them. "You came back," she cried, throwing her arms around Ethan first, then Olivia, then Jack. She was different now. Her cheeks weren't as hollow, her eyes weren't filled with fear. She looked like a child again, and in her small hands she clutched something carefully folded. "I made this for you," she said shyly. Ethan took the paper and unfolded it. It was a drawing, crude, colorful, done in the shaky strokes of an 8-year-old. 3 stick-figure police officers stood next to a small girl and her mother, all holding hands. Above them, in bright, unsteady letters, were the words, "My angels." Ethan stared at it, his throat suddenly tight. Olivia wiped away a tear before it could fall. Jack turned away completely, rubbing at his eyes. The little girl looked up at them, her expression filled with something pure, unwavering, and powerful. Gratitude. Love. Hope. Ethan swallowed hard, looking at her small, beaming face, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "We're the lucky ones for meeting you." That night, when the officers drove away, the world felt a little lighter. There were still crimes to stop, cases to solve, and bad people out there, but there was also goodness. There was hope. And sometimes one small act of kindness, one moment of compassion, could change an entire life. This was more than a rescue. This was a second chance. And for a brave little girl and her mother, it was the beginning of something beautiful.